What if the biggest problem with one of the most beautiful sci-fi movies ever made was the moment it stopped being the movie everyone loved? For nearly 70 minutes, Sunshine feels like the future of science fiction. A dying sun, a desperate mission, a crew carrying humanity's final hope across the emptiness of space. Then, without much warning, a mysterious survivor appears aboard the ship. The movie suddenly abandons its slow-burn scientific realism, and a film about saving humanity becomes a terrifying fight against one broken human being. Some fans call it the moment Sunshine loses itself. Quentin Tarantino went even further, arguing that the final act damaged what could have been a masterpiece. But nearly 20 years later, something strange happened. The very decision that divided audiences is also the reason Sunshine refuses to disappear. So how did Danny Boyle and Alex Garland create one of the most visually stunning space films ever made? Only to end it with the choice that still has sci-fi fans arguing today. This is the story of Sunshine, the $40 million sci-fi gamble that failed at the box office, but somehow became one of the most debated cult classics of its generation. Use 3 seconds to leave a like and subscribe to this channel. It's a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you for subscribing. Now let's begin. 50 years in the future, the sun is dying, and Earth is freezing along with it. The Icarus I mission was sent to deliver a stellar bomb the size of Manhattan into the sun's core to reignite it. It never came back, and nobody knows what happened to it. 7 years later, the Icarus II carries humanity's last remaining payload and a crew of 8, led by physicist Robert Capa, played by Cillian Murphy, whose entire job is making sure the bomb actually works when it matters. For the first 2 acts, the film plays almost entirely as a patient, meditative survival story: oxygen leaks, damaged solar shields, the crew slowly cracking under the psychological weight of staring directly into a star for months at a time. Then, while approaching the sun, the crew receives a distress signal from the missing Icarus I, the ship that disappeared 7 years earlier during the first attempt to save humanity. Against their better judgment, they decide to investigate, but what they find isn't another chance at salvation. Hidden aboard the abandoned ship is Pinbacker, the only survivor of the first mission. After years alone, exposed to extreme conditions and driven to the edge of sanity, he has transformed into something far more dangerous than any malfunction or disaster the crew could have imagined, and when he begins hunting the Icarus II crew through the ship's dark corridors, the mission to save humanity becomes a fight simply to survive. Suddenly, the greatest threat isn't the dying sun, the failing spacecraft, or the impossible mission ahead, it's another human being. Everything the film had been building toward quietly, carefully, gets pulled apart by something nobody saw coming. Alex Garland began writing Sunshine in 2004, working from ideas rooted in the heat death of the universe rather than adapting any existing book, and handed Danny Boyle a 90-page draft on New Year's Eve that same year, which is either dedication or a very specific way to ruin someone's holiday, depending on how you look at it. It was their third collaboration after The Beach and 28 Days Later, and by this point Boyle trusted Garland enough to let the script evolve through more than 20 drafts over the following months. Early versions leaned almost entirely into procedural, scientifically grounded storytelling. Later drafts deliberately introduced psychological strain and something closer to horror. Built specifically around a character named Pinbacker, whose fanaticism was designed from the start to break the film's tone on purpose. In other words, the tonal shift everyone argues about wasn't a mistake that snuck in during editing. It was baked into the plan somewhere around Draft 3. To keep the science at least defensible, Boyle and Garland brought in physicist Brian Cox from the University of Manchester as scientific advisor, and Cox gave the cast regular lectures on solar physics throughout production. He also talked the filmmakers out of their original plan for the stellar bomb, which was originally sized to match the mass of the moon, and got it scaled down to something closer to the size of Manhattan, which still sounds enormous, but is at least a plan a physicist could nod along to without visibly flinching. Boyle has joked that Cox is the nicest guy imaginable right up until you tell him something's scientifically wrong, at which point he simply says no and waits for you to fix it. Cinematographer Alwyn Cutler shot the sun sequences to feel almost religious in scale, and composer John Murphy's score, particularly one recurring theme, ended up getting reused in trailers for other films so often afterward that plenty of people have heard it without ever realizing where it actually came from. The ensemble includes Cillian Murphy as Carper, Chris Evans as Engineer Mace, Rose Byrne, Michelle Yeoh, Cliff Curtis, Troy Garrity, Benedict Wong, and Hiroyuki Sanada as the ship's captain. Garland wrote a private backstory for every single cast member that only that actor got to read, with one deliberate exception. Cliff Curtis, playing the ship's psych officer, was given access to everyone's secret history so his character's quiet unease would feel earned rather than performed. Mark Strong, playing Pinbacker, was the final piece of casting added, brought in specifically to embody a character built to break the film's own rules. Here's the part that ages the movie in an entirely different way. In 2007. This was a talented but not yet enormous cast. Today it includes an Academy Award winner for Best Actor and the man who spent over a decade playing Captain America, which makes revisiting this flop feel a little like finding a garage band demo tape that happened to have for future headliners on it. Here's where the film asks its audience to take a genuine leap. Once the Icarus II crew boards the abandoned Icarus I, they discover Pinbacker, the sole survivor of the first mission, horrifically burned and convinced that extinguishing humanity is God's actual will. From that point forward, Sunshine essentially becomes a slasher movie set on a spaceship, with Pinbacker stalking the crew through corridors in a way that owes far more to genre horror than to the grounded science fiction the first hour so carefully established. Boyle has acknowledged directly that some viewers feel Pinbacker breaks the realism too far to recover from. It's a fair complaint. It's also, according to Garland's own drafts, exactly the point, introducing a genuinely deranged human as the final obstacle, rather than one more equipment failure, so that the last true threat to the mission isn't the sun or the ship. It's faith itself, gone catastrophically wrong at the worst possible moment. Whether that swing pays off is, unsurprisingly, the entire debate this video exists to have. Critical reaction split almost exactly along this fault line. Reviewers who loved the first two acts often felt genuinely betrayed by the third, and Quentin Tarantino was blunt enough to say publicly that Garland's own writing did more damage to the film's integrity than any studio interference could have managed. Other critics and a slowly growing wave of retrospective viewers have taken the opposite position entirely, arguing that a purely clinical space survival story would have gone soft exactly when the film needed to hit hardest. There's a genuinely funny footnote buried in all of this. On the DVD commentary, Boyle and Brian Cox, the director and his own hired physicist, turn out to disagree with each other about a specific plot detail involving Pinbacker and one crew member's death. If the filmmakers themselves can't fully agree on what happened in their own third act, it's probably unfair to expect the audience to arrive at a tidy consensus either. Consider this video your permission slip to disagree with everyone in the comments, including me. Sunshine was made on a budget of around $40 million and grossed roughly $35 million worldwide, a straightforward box office disappointment. It didn't help that its wide release landed the same weekend as The Simpsons movie, in a summer already dominated by Transformers and a handful of other blockbusters with far bigger built-in audiences. Without a major marquee star to anchor the marketing at the time, Sunshine was always going to need exceptional word of mouth to build any momentum, and the film's own divisive third act made that word of mouth genuinely mixed rather than uniformly glowing. Reported plans for a potential future installment never moved forward, with Boyle later suggesting a studio executive at the time was specifically unhappy with how bleak the ending felt, killing most of the crew including the one character carrying real hope, which is a very studio executive thing to be upset about. A modest, thoughtful sci-fi film rarely wins a summer build for robots that turn into trucks. In the years since, Sunshine has settled into a genuinely devoted cult following, with retrospective reviews increasingly willing to embrace the film's bittersweet tone and stacked, now famous cast rather than relitigating the third act every single time. Some viewers have come around entirely to the Pinbacker sequence, arguing that most movies would honestly be improved by a third act that spontaneously turns into a slasher film. Others still find it a jarring detour from something that was working perfectly well without it. Both camps, at this point, are just as loud as each other online, which is arguably the healthiest possible outcome for a film built specifically around an unresolved argument. nearly 2 decades later, Sunshine remains one of the most rewatched, flawed masterpiece arguments in modern science fiction, exactly the kind of film people revisit specifically to have the exact same debate all over again, on purpose. If nothing else, it proves a film can lose the box office fight and still eventually win the war. Here's my honest take, for whatever it's worth. I don't think the third act ruins Sunshine. I think it's the moment the film stops being polite about what staring into the actual death of your entire species does to a person's faith, and that's a rougher, less comfortable idea than the equipment malfunctioned again. Whether that's a brilliant swing or a genuine miscalculation is a question I'm not going to pretend to settle in one video, mostly because, as we just covered, the director and his own physicist couldn't fully settle it either, on the record, on their own commentary track. That feels like a fair place to leave it, so here's my question for you. Does Pinbacker's arrival elevate this movie, or does it derail something that was already working? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you're new here, subscribe. Don't forget to check out our full sci-fi and horror deep dives. Thank you for watching.